Zoe arrives home and calls out for her mom. She asks her where her laundry is. Zoe's mom replies that she hasn't seen it. Zoe thinks it's odd that her clothes seem to be disappearing all of a sudden. Meanwhile, we see Gangnam crouched at the end of the street, sniffing her underwear. He looks up with a creepy grin, imagining all the things he and his wife will do when they finally meet. Next, we shift to the convenience store, where Daniel is lost in thought about his last conversation with Yui. He can't believe they are the same person. Gangnam walks into the store, staring at his phone, and Daniel glances over to see Zoe's stream on Paprika TV. When he looks up, he sees Gangnam staring down at him with a fierce look. Daniel quickly checks the whiskey that Gangnam usually buys, but this time, there's something else that needs to be scanned. I wonder what it could be. Finally, we see Zoe taking out the trash while chatting on the phone. She shares about her streaming success and how she's gaining tons of new followers, hinting that she could soon be one of the top creators on Paprika TV. After putting her phone down, Zoe feels a wave of fear wash over her, since there's no one around to take her mind off the creepy atmosphere of the alley. Suddenly, a voice from the shadows calls out to her. It's Gangnam, asking for directions. Zoe jumps in surprise and tries to brush him off, saying she doesn't really know the area. Gangnam steps closer, but just as he's about to approach her, Daniel jumps in front of Zoe to protect her. Zoe is confused about how this guy knows her name. Daniel yells that Gangnam has a knife. Gangnam swings the blade at Daniel, who feels the urge to run and hide, but he knows he has to protect Zoe. The knife gets dangerously close to his head. Just as he's about to get hit, he remembers Zach's fight with Yui's boyfriend. Zach had managed to block the guy's punches and then landed a hit right on the side of his face. Daniel quickly strikes Gangnam's wrist, making him drop the knife. Now that Gangnam is unarmed, he starts to back away. Daniel twists his hips and bends his arm, barely missing Gangnam. He realizes he can't pull off the same move Zach did in his small body, so he decides to shield Zoe. Gangnam yells at Daniel, claiming that Zoe is meant to be with him. He starts throwing punches at Daniel, trying to reach Zoe. Finally, she remembers where she's seen Daniel before, when he went to the bar to pick up Big Daniel. Gangnam keeps trying to get through to her, but Daniel stands firm. Frustrated, Gangnam goes to grab the knife again, but before he can do any more harm, a barbell flies right at him. Vasco appears, panting and sweating. Gangnam collapses to the floor in pain, threatening to kill Vasco for ruining his perfect face. Vasco replies that he witnessed everything, and now he's his opponent now. Before Gangnam approached Zoe, we see a flashback of little Daniel peeking around a corner. He spots Gangnam watching Zoe's broadcast while holding a knife, so he quickly dials 911. Daniel tells the operator that someone is out on the street with a knife. They ask if he feels threatened, and he replies no. They then question if the person is drunk, and Daniel admits he isn't sure. The operator asks him to speak louder, but Daniel explains he's trying to stay hidden. They want to know if it's a razor or a kitchen knife. The dispatcher informs him that they've sent an officer to check it out, but Daniel worries they won't get there in time. He thinks about who else he could call nearby. He remembers Vasco talking to him when he was at the convenience store with Jiho and Duke, telling him to reach out if he ever needed help. Nervously, Daniel calls Vasco, who answers while working out. Daniel considers hanging up, but blurts out that there's someone with a knife. Vasco lets the weights fall from his hands, grabs his phone, and asks Daniel where he is. Just as Daniel is about to reply, Gangnam starts walking towards Zoe. Daniel drops the phone and yells at Zoe to be careful. Vasco shouts into the phone, trying to find out where Daniel is, but nobody can hear him. Now we're back in the present, and Vasco is complaining to Daniel about how he had to search all over town for them. Gangnam stands up, holding a knife, and yells at Vasco about what he's done to his beautiful face, claiming he won't lose this time. He boasts about sending Zoe a ton of balloons and insists it's not his fault he looks the way he does. He argues that he hasn't done anything wrong and is just playing the hand he was dealt. Vasco grabs Gangnam's hand and goes for his throat. He lifts Gangnam off the ground and tells him that using a knife against someone who isn't armed is unfair. Vasco squeezes Gangnam's wrist until the knife falls from his hand. He warns Gangnam to get ready as he prepares to throw a punch, but suddenly, a faint voice calls out from the ground. Gangnam's father suddenly appears from the shadows, pleading with Vasco to show mercy for his son. He bows his head to the ground, begging Vasco not to harm Gangnam. Vasco lets him go, and his father starts crawling on his knees, asking Vasco to forgive his only child. Gangnam yells at his dad, telling him to leave and insisting that he can take care of himself. Daniel watches Gangnam and remembers how he used to shout at his mom too. He thinks that Gangnam reminds him of himself. Gangnam then starts yelling at Vasco, saying that people treated him like he was worthless and judged him because of his looks. They disrespected him and discriminated against him. It's not fair, he screams in anger and frustration. The rich keep getting richer while the poor just get poorer. He tells Vasco that girls only care about looks and money, and that Vasco will never understand what it's like to be looked down upon because he's big and strong. Vasco cuts in, saying that it's not right to blame others for his problems. He asks Gangnam if he has ever tried to change things, but Gangnam replies that there's nothing he can do. Trying to change himself feels pointless, and he can't escape his situation. Vasco stares directly at Gangnam and tells him that he used to be just like him, but he overcame everything life had thrown at him. If he can, so can everyone else. Those words hit Daniel hard, almost like Vasco was talking straight to him instead of Gangnam. Soon after, the police show up and arrest Gangnam for trying to commit murder. Once the officers leave, people start coming out of their homes to see what all the noise was about. Vasco smiles at Daniel and thanks him for reaching out. Zoe runs over and gives Daniel a huge hug, asking if he's hurt at all. She praises his courage, and Vasco watches them with a tear rolling down his cheek. Meanwhile, a group of people is gathered outside the convenience store, waiting for Daniel to finish his bathroom break. The next day, Big Daniel reflects on Vasco's words about making a change in their lives. Zoe approaches him and he checks in on her, mentioning he saw on the news that she was attacked by a man with a knife. Zoe replies that she's feeling much better now and has decided to stop streaming. She even returned all her earnings to Gangnam's father. Then she asks Big Daniel if he knows where little Daniel lives. Daniel asks her why she's curious about that, and she smacks her forehead, asking herself why she is asking silly questions like that. Daniel thinks she's still feeling the effects of last night and forgets her question. Yui enters the classroom with bruises all over her face. Some students start whispering about her injuries and how she got them. Daniel says hi to Yui. Zach thinks to himself that he can't believe she's still flirting with Daniel, even in her current state. She takes out a handkerchief and says it's a gift, but it turns out she's giving it to Zach. His eyes go wide, hoping Mira didn't hear her. Yui thanks Zach for everything that happened last night and mentions that she broke up with her boyfriend. Zach leans in and whispers to Yui that she shouldn't talk about last night in front of Mira, or else she'll misunderstand and confront him. Meanwhile, we see viewers commenting on Duke's rapping skills, and the viewer count is at 52. Duke is really excited because he finally found people who enjoy his music and don't make fun of him for how he looks. Meanwhile, Mira and Zach are walking home from school, but they're in the middle of an argument. Zach insists to Mira that there's nothing going on between him and Yui, claiming it's all a big misunderstanding. Just then, the boyfriend from yesterday shows up and tells Zach he's been waiting for him. Mira questions Zach about whether he's been fighting again, and even though he tries to deny it, she cuts him off and says she's leaving. Zach drops to his knees. The older guys from before return, and the big guy asks Zach if he sent his girl away so she wouldn't have to watch him get beaten up. They notice Zach is crying, and they all start laughing. But Zach looks at them with a devilish smile, tears streaming down his face, and says he has nothing to lose now. He cracks his knuckles and warns everyone that he's not in the mood today. He starts swinging his fists wildly in the air, blaming everyone for Mira leaving him. In the next scene, we see Mr. Beanie and Mr. Necklace on the ground, agreeing to never mess with Zach again. Zach is sitting in class with a little smile on his face. He turns to one of his friends and asks if they can help him find a specific pair of shoes. He knows his friend is always checking Craigslist, so if anyone can find what he wants, it's him. Even though Zach looks happy, Namsu feels like Zach is bossing him around. After school, Namsu starts looking through all the listings, but everything is way more expensive than what Zach wanted. It turns out a famous pop star has been wearing those shoes, which is why the prices shot up. We see a series of clips of Namsu reaching out to different sellers, but he gets rejected every time. One seller asks if it's okay that the shoes are completely ripped, while another thinks Namsu is joking. Finally, he finds a seller willing to sell the shoes for $300. They suggest sending the shoes by courier, but Namsu insists on meeting in person. The last time he got something delivered, it was just a brick and a note that said, "Haha." Plus, the money he has is actually Zach's, so if he gets scammed, Zach will never let him live it down. He asks the seller if they can meet face to face, but they want to chat on Messenger instead, saying that's their preference. Namsu added the seller as a friend and noticed her profile picture was of a really pretty girl. He felt excited and a little shy about meeting her in person. The next day, he told Zach that he found a seller and was going to meet her. Zach said he didn't need to go that far, but Namsu insisted, telling Zach that when he goes in person, he can tell if products were fake just by looking at them. Zach thanks Namsu for picking up the shoes for him. After school, Namsu was all dressed up in the latest fashion, eagerly waiting to meet the seller. He knew girls liked guys who looked strong, so he put on shoulder pads, hip pads, and special shoes to make himself look taller. He felt like a superhero, thinking everyone was admiring him and calling him the most handsome guy around. When the seller arrived, she asked if he was the buyer looking for the shoes, but before he could respond, two guys hold him down and tell him to look straight ahead and smile like they're buddies, so no one gets suspicious. Namsu is pressed against a wall. The group that robbed him is busy counting the cash. The girl explains that Namsu wasn't actually chatting with her on the phone. The guy counting the money was just using her picture as his profile. He says it's always the losers who fall for this kind of trick. The big guy warns Namsu that they have his address, name, school, and phone number. If he tries to tell the police, they'll know exactly where to find him and beat him up. Namsu looks down, thinking about how he'll tell Zach that he got scammed. As the gang gets ready to leave, Namsu pleads with them to give him back his money, saying the $300 belongs to a professional boxer. The leader looks at Namsu and asks if he really thinks he looks that easy to mess with. He steps closer, saying he'll show Namsu just how scary he can be. Namsu is covered in bandages and tells Zach that he got tricked out of his $300, which he was going to use for shoes. He worries that Zach might hit him again and wonders if he'll have to pay him back. Zach, feeling frustrated, thinks he should have gone with Namsu. "You must have been really scared. It's my fault," Zach says. Namsu starts to cry, saying he didn't do anything wrong and that it was his mistake for trusting the profile picture and going alone. Yui joins in and asks what's going on. Zach explains everything, and Yui asks if they still have the scammer's contact. Namsu says he has their info on his phone and shows the profile picture. Everyone is shocked to see it's a girl, but Namsu explains he thought it was a girl too, until he got there and found other guys with her who robbed him. Yui mentions that their fake phone is valuable, so they plan to use it until the police catch on. They look up the profile on Craigslist and find all the fake stuff being sold. Zach suggests that they should use a different phone and pretend to be interested in buying something. He believes that if they think they're dealing with someone easy to fool, like Namsu, they will definitely show up. Namsu feels hurt by this. Zoe tells Zach he should change his profile picture to someone who looks easy to trick. They ask Jiho if he can look their way for a picture. Once they snap the photo, it turns out great. Jiho thinks to himself that he doesn't really understand what's going on, but he feels really uncomfortable and unpleasant about it. Zach sends them a message, and they agree to meet. Daniel asks Yui how she knows so much about this stuff, and she explains that her ex-boyfriend used to do similar things, so she learned a lot about scamming. The scene shifts to the group, who are back to their usual tricks. Their target is a guy with a baby face, but when they arrive, they discover he's actually a sumo wrestler, and he brought some friends. The gang leader tells them he doesn't have the laptop they want to buy. The sumo wrestler warns them that they're bad people and that they've picked the wrong people to mess with. They prepare for a fight. In a quick move, the leader kicks one of the sumo wrestlers in the head, knocking him out cold. He reveals that he has a black belt in Taekwondo and that the ones who have gotten involved with the wrong crowd are actually them. The leader's friend crashes into the other sumo wrestler. He pushes his hands back, and the sumo wrestler leader claims that they both have incredible strength. The leader then asks the last wrestler if he finally sees the difference in their power. The wrestler charges at the leader. In the next scene, we see him counting money while sitting on top of the sumo wrestler, who is face down on the ground. The girl looks down at the unconscious sumo wrestler and feels scared about leaving the gang because she doesn't want to end up like him. She starts to cry quietly, wishing someone would rescue her from this nightmare.